Welcome to the nextTalk podcast. We are passionate about keeping kids safe in an overexposed world.
It's Mandy and Kim, and we're navigating tech, culture, and faith with our kids.
We have a very special guest back on our show today. Brian Montgomery is here. Brian, welcome.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, we're excited to have a conversation and good to see you guys again.
If you guys are tuning in for the first time and you're like, who's Brian Montgomery? Because a lot of our crowd favorites are like, yay, Brian, we get to hear from Brian today. If you don't know who that is, we encourage you to go to our website, search Walker. Walker is Brian's son, and that show will pop up and you can listen to that entire story of why we met Brian. But we're so glad to have you back. Brian, since you've been on the show, you've encountered some health conditions, and I get literally stopped at events with people saying to me, I'm praying for Brian. How is he? How is he? So before we get going into our content for today, we're going to kind of tackle pornography and how it played into Walker's sextortion scheme. But before we get into that, can you give us a health update? Because I know a lot of our community, they're praying for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of go back, I was diagnosed in January of 22 with a stage 1 colon cancer. We lost Walker in December of 22. So went in for a colonoscopy. They found that it was a tumor and they removed it. Come to find out it had cancer in it. Went and had surgery, had a portion of my colon removed. And the good news was at the time that it had not spread. It was just in my colon, which is categorized as a stage 1. And really, they just said, look, you're cured. You don't have to worry about it. It's a 96% cure rate when you find it at this stage. So go live life. Don't worry about it. Well, we started coming. They want to do 6-month checkups. So we started coming and doing checkups. And we went back. So, of course, we lost Walker in December. Went back that end of February, 1st of March, which would have been our year checkup. Had no problems at all, so everything was clear. Again, reassured us that that's something that is extremely rare to come back under those circumstances, and so we thought it was over. Went back in September of this year, and again, for the doctor's visit, and he was like, "Look, you're good. Don't expect anything different than we've had in the past." Well, they called 3 days later and said that we had some elevated blood levels, which are an indication of cancer, and wanted to do a PET scan. And so, of course, we knew that wasn't good. Went in for a PET scan and determined that it had metastasized to my liver. Extremely rare case. Of course, with kind of the ride we've been on the last couple of years, we see. Just God reveals himself in difficult times. So we're definitely having those. And so I guess the update on that is that was in September. The treatment regimen was to do 2 months of chemo, 4 treatments, take a break, have surgery in January. And then that surgery would be to remove those tumors from my liver and then start back up with chemo as soon as I recover. So another 8 treatments of chemo, spring and summer. So now right now, mid-January, I'm 5 or 6 weeks out from my last chemo treatment. I feel great. Feel normal. You wouldn't know any different just walking around right now. About to go in for surgery. We're optimistic that'll go well. Like I said, I'm in good health. I feel fine. Don't have any residual effects from the chemo. So we're optimistic that that'll go well, and then recover from that, and then start back with chemo spring and summer. So definitely ask the listeners to continue to remember our family in our prayers. And I think the temptation, and I certainly don't want to discourage people from praying that I'm healed of this cancer. Because I want to be here another 50 years if God wants to leave me here. But at the same time, I think about the Apostle Paul when he was writing to the churches in prison. He didn't say, "Hey, pray that they let me out of prison." He said, "I'm going to ask you to pray that doors will be open for the gospel, and that we'll when presented those opportunities, we'll be able to speak clearly and in persuasion of the gospel. And that's the, the end goal with an eternal perspective. That's where we want to be, and that's how we want to live. At the same time, it sure would not be nice to be able to tell that story for another 40 years. So, yeah, that's kind of the that's where we're at to date. And, we're optimistic God's going to figure a way, work through this with us.
Well, I think, just like when you shared Walker's story, as heartbreaking as it is, but you having faith, and that faith in God changes everything when you're faced with especially horrific situations in your life. And you're just a beacon of light that shines in tragic situations. And I don't know why God is using you in this space, because I know it probably is really sucky for you. But know that the outside world sees your faith and is inspired by it once again. So I want to say thank you for your break in between chemo and your upcoming surgery to take time to talk to our listeners and dig in and help us kind of dissect Walker's story even a little bit more to understand how we can keep our kids safer. Like, what can we learn from this?
Yeah, I think that especially your audience and y'all's staff and y'all personally have vested yourselves in our lives, in a real short amount of time. And I see it's interesting, I always question whether or not I would have been as personally connected to somebody else's situation as you guys have been to us. And it's refreshing, and it's so appreciated that other people care, and they really do. I mean, the world that we live in, it's easy to find a lot of bad things going on, and people that are really just looking out for themselves. But boy, we sure have a lot of good people still left in this world that want to do the right thing and want to be there for their fellow man. Because apart from us telling our story, you guys didn't know us from Adam, and there's no personal connection there prior to that. And you didn't have to do that, and your listeners didn't have to do that, but they absolutely have, and we're eternally grateful.
I think I can speak for Mandy and our listeners that we see in you ourselves, the desire to be good moms and dads, and a hope of heaven, and wanting to minister to our kids and our community. And sometimes we don't know how to do that. And so when we see people like you, Brian, and Courtney, who are willing to be transparent and honest and real in sharing your struggles, but also, here's what works and here's what's helped, we're just drawn to that. And so we are a community, we are brothers and sisters. And I think that's, where we're at, is like, we want to walk alongside you, and we're thankful you want to walk alongside us.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's just, I didn't expect it. I guess I'll say that I didn't expect it from, and obviously we're talking about you guys and your listeners, but it's been a response from around the world, to be honest. And, I think about, I listen to a lot of podcasts. Courtney kind of makes fun of me, but she's not really a podcaster, but, I listen to a lot. I want to know from all sorts of opinions, and it's really hard for me to understand how we can navigate the world we live in, whether we're going through a good time or a bad time, without an eternal perspective. And those, but there are a lot of people that we can listen to that don't really have that perspective. And, how do we go through these situations without that? If not, the decisions we make are completely different. And so, I'm just thankful that we have a good community to surround ourselves with.
Well, this is the church. This is the good thing about the church. And, we beat the church up. The church has done a lot of bad things. We've taken wrong turns, whatever. But this is what, to me, God envisioned the church to be, holding each other up, carrying each other's burdens. And so we're just grateful to you. It's been a Holy Spirit moment, and you guys have become friends. And, we're in it together. We're in it together. We all have this main goal of making sure these kids are safe on their devices, making sure they have strong parents guiding them, and then pointing them to Jesus. Like, we're all aligned on that. And so I think that's why we're all invested with one another. So we're thankful for you. I've loved behind the scenes getting to know you and your family, and you're just genuine, you're real. So I want to move into the direction of why we wanted to have you on again, because, and for those of you who don't know Walker's story, it was, Brian, why don't you give us like just a abbreviated version, because they can go listen to the long version on the podcast. But I just want to give an abbreviated version before we dive into the pornography aspect that we really want to talk about today.
Yeah. So December the 1st of 22, Walker, my 16-year-old son, committed suicide. And at the time, we had no idea. I mean, Walker was a well-adjusted kid, great social life. And like I said, we go in depth in that podcast about the exact circumstances, but we didn't have any idea what had happened. I mean, it just did not, so far out of character for who we knew Walker was. Fast forward 5 or 6 weeks, we find out that Walker was a victim of sextortion, which is, I mean, in the most simplest form, is where someone gets content, usually sexual content, whether it's just nudity or behaving in some sexual act on video or pictures. They convince the person to send those pictures or videos to them, and thinking that that's a sexual encounter with a counterpart, a female or male. And so that's what they did. They convinced Walker that he was interacting on Instagram with a teenage girl, and once that was over, once they had the content, the media, they then immediately come back to Walker trying to bribe him for money. Over the course of that night, Walker committed suicide, and it turned our world upside down. Our lives will never be the same. It's just different. Everything's different. Nothing's the same. And so from that point, we started trying to understand how we could sound the alarm for other parents. And I think that did a lot of different things for our family. It showed our family that God is faithful even in the midst of those extremely difficult situations. He created opportunities for us to tell the story. It was a gift for him to at least give us the information to know what happened to Walker, that it didn't just randomly commit suicide. We never knew what, there's parents that their kids are not here anymore, and they don't have any idea why. We know why. We know that Walker was the person we thought he was. He got caught in a trap, and he couldn't figure a way out. So that was the initial podcast, and that really put us into a conversation about these topics. And I think we were talking just a minute ago off air. I'm not qualified to give anybody advice. I can just tell you what our experiences have been, and speak honestly and truthfully to some of these topics. And obviously, we've been exposed to a lot more of this kind of information in the past year. But we just want to help. That's all. We're not here to make a dollar. We're not here to get a name. We're not here for any of that. We just want to make sure other parents and other kids don't experience the same type of life change we had to endure.
So when you lost Walker and you had no idea why, so the FBI got involved, mm-hmm. They dug into his phone, and that's when you started uncovering this Instagram scheme. That the reason we had you on originally, one of the main alarming things in Walker's story for me was it was over a 2-hour time span. We've worked a lot of sextortion cases at nextTalk where we've been involved with that, but it's been normally over months or mm-hmm. weeks. We've never seen anything start to finish in 2 hours where we've lost a kid with that. That was new to us. And we were immediately alarmed. Like, we got to get this story out, because any of our kids, we have online predators taking advantage of our young boys who have hormones and are, all this stuff. Like, it's unfathomable to me. So the FBI traced the predator, mm-hmm. right, out of the country. And then that case, I guess, is still open, correct? Okay. And ongoing.
Yep. So, to kind of fill in those blanks, they traced it to Nigeria. And that's where a lot of this is originating from. Apparently, there's a network of these guys over there that have figured out they can make money. You talk about that, the fact that Walker was happening one night. So when the FBI uncovered Walker's telephone, the things that we learned were Walker's communication was normal. It was about football. It was about hunting. It was about his friends. It was literally earlier that night, he had been communicating back and forth with some friends, just sending Bible verses back and forth. I mean, Walker was a part of our youth group. I mean, he was a regular kid. And so we thought that, but obviously we knew something had went horribly wrong and had no idea what. But once we got Walker's phone back, we see that we've confirmed all that. I mean, it was literally Walker did go to bed normal that night. He went to bed just like he did every other night, and he wasn't depressed, and he wasn't suicidal, and he wasn't dealing with any deep-seated issues. Walker was attacked in his room through his telephone, and the other thing, the point to make about that, I think, is that in that situation, the suspect, they kind of changed their the way they were operating into more of a smash and grab type operation. A lot of these kids, you talk about a lot of the ones that you've encountered in the past, previous, suspects were grooming kids over time. They would spread it out over multiple days, multiple weeks, gain confidence. And there was time there for a parent to intercept something, right? Well, I guess they figured out that if they applied maximum pressure in a real short amount of time, they were making more money. They were getting more kids to respond and pay because that extreme pressure in a real short amount of time gives a kid, especially a 16-year-old, and Walker was well adjusted and smart and had a lot of common sense, hard worker, all those things you want your kid to be. But when you find yourself in an extreme pressure in a real short amount of time that becomes really intense, that huge pressure, which makes some kids pay, cause Walker to panic. And that's what we're finding. It's typically what's happening now is these suspects have seen that, they've seen that these predators, they've seen that this is the best way to get paid the most. And so the unfortunate part, what we learned was most of the time what will happen is if the kid will block them and just walk away, these predators, they'll just go to the next kid. It's just a list of people that they're trying to get to, and they figure out they're not going to get paid. Well, they just quit. Once they know that they've been blocked and they're not communicating anymore, they just stop. And because it's really not in their best interest to share the content, because it just brings more law enforcement pressure that they don't want. They want to get paid is what they want. Well, Walker didn't know that. Walker thought his life was over, and the guy was continually just pressuring Walker as hard as he could over a real short amount of time, and that pressure just built to the point that Walker couldn't see a way out.
That term smash and grab, that really hit me hard because you're right. We have seen this grooming over time, and just like everything else, people adapt, and even bad people adapt. And you're right, to be able to see, I can get the same result in a shorter amount of time. That's really scary to think about. And it takes me back to the first time we talked with you. And that was one of the things that we came away with, two things really. Yes, the short amount of time, but that Walker was, this great, well-adjusted kid, wasn't struggling from depression or any of that. And that a lot of parents came to us after and said, we see what you're saying, that they're targeting these, good kids, quote unquote, kids that aren't struggling necessarily, right, that are doing well in school, that are involved in the church. And so that was eye-opening for us as listeners and as Christians and as parents. And so it's interesting to put those two together, that, when we walked away from your last podcast, one of the messages that rang true was, wake me up. That's something that you said. And that is something that we have heard a lot of parents, Walker's life has truly affected so many families because they've been able to tell their kids, wake me up, and tell his story. Mm-hmm. And now with the thought of this smash and grab, it's even more important to say that and to explain that to our kids. They have shifted the way they're doing business, and you must wake me up. And so mm-hmm. That just brings a whole new light to the story that you shared with us before. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Brian, at this point, I think where we want to go with this show is difficult, but important, because as parents, we're always kind of dissecting and pulling apart moments when things don't go the way that we imagine they're going to go. And you have been very reflective and very transparent about some of the things you think are important about conversations with our kids. And so we really wanted to tackle the idea of pornography, which is something that you have talked about now across the country, and how that played into Walker's story and may have been a part of the reason he was open to this sextortion scheme a little more than maybe he would have if he had not engaged in pornography.
Right. Yeah, I think, that I've thought a lot about this, and obviously we want to go back and we want to look at activity. I mean, of course, we did that right away, just before we even knew what happened. Just what did we miss? What did we not do as parents? Where did we miss the boat? And once we retrieved the data from his phone and understood what was there was pornography on his phone. The way the FBI conveyed it is Walker wasn't, a porn addict. He wasn't looking at pornography every day. It wasn't. But he's a 16-year-old boy. And he had access to it, and I think I said that on our first podcast. Is just that I know that if I would have had access to that kind of information untethered, I would have been doing the same thing, because I know, coming from a generation of, boys looking at magazines and the occasional VHS video kind of stuff, satellite TV, that would be the friend that had that. That would have been the extent of that. But to where we are today, where it's instant access at any point in time, things have changed. And, I think there's so many factors here that contribute. One factor is that we are constantly desensitized to sexual relationships and how those are most healthy. If I were to open my Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook page, it would not take very long at all before it wouldn't be pornography, but it would be something that would easily lead a 16-year-old male's mind and even a 47-year-old's mind to, what can I access? If I can see that, which is not really pornography, all I have to do is go to Safari and I can look at pornography. I can look at the most graphic nudity and sexual content that I want to. And so what's prohibiting that? And I think that, what's prohibiting that as a man, and what's prohibiting that as a father, what's prohibiting that from a 16-year-old? What are we going to say that says, okay, you shouldn't do that. Right. And as a dad, that's where I feel like I really, I didn't understand, because if you would have asked me before, is Walker looking at that kind of content, I'd have said, yeah, I'm sure he is. I mean, 16 years old, he has access to it. And I really didn't give it the credibility of damage that it deserved, to really use that terminology, because, I thought about it in the same context of my generation. My generation, it was a pretty routine activity. Obviously, it wasn't talked about, and it's not talked about now to any extent. But it was kind of that innocent type sin that you could do, and it wasn't, because when we were coming up, the big message was against teen pregnancy. We all knew the 16-year-old, 15-year-old girl that got pregnant, and it ruined her life. And if the boy was any count, it ruined his life too. And so, and to be honest, I was a product of that. I mean, my mom was young when she got pregnant with me. It worked out really well for me because I'm here. She took care of me. My mom and dad got married, and it worked out. But there was a lot of kids that it didn't. So that fear of that, it was almost like pornography was the answer to that. Well, here we are today in a world where pornography is contributing to kids not getting married, kids not entering into healthy relationships, boys are not pursuing girls. And for Walker specifically, I think that this was a trap, and it was a trap that was set. We can look at this in just a practical sense of there's a lot of bad traps on the internet, and Walker just happened into one. Or we can look at it from a spiritual perspective, which is what I choose to do, and see where Satan was setting this trap long in advance from that night. He took his time to trap Walker. And so I think that we don't understand how deep this trap can go, and the things that may seem innocent, they may be innocent in and of themselves, but whenever you see them play out all the way to the end of the road, you see, oh, that's what was happening. And it may be too late. For us, it's too late to fix that with Walker. I've still got a 14-year-old son, so it's not too late for him, and it's not too late for me. It's not too late for the listener, the dad that's listening that says, I think the statistics, I've got some statistics on pornography. I mean, I was in a church not long ago speaking, and 35% of all internet downloads are pornography. Think about the volume that would have to represent. 64% of Christian men and 15% of Christian women say they watch pornography at least once a week. 50% of pastors view pornography on a regular basis. So when we talk about those statistics, obviously a huge chunk of our population doesn't see anything wrong with it. And even if you don't believe in a God, even if you don't believe in eternity, even if you don't believe in honoring the God we serve, you got to see that it leads to some really bad things. And I don't think anything, God doesn't tell us not to do anything for the purpose of just not doing it. He tells us not to do things that are not healthy. And so bringing that back around to some of the issues that we know can happen, and Walker is the extreme example of that. I believe if I'd have been a stronger leader with Walker, had better conversations with him about that, it would have been more prohibition and helped potentially. He may have still fell for that, but it would have helped limit that as a mechanism to trap him.
Brian, I'm so glad as a dad that you're saying this. And I say that because I get stopped at events where dads attend, and I try to paint this picture for them that pornography has changed so much. And it's not just, curiosity of seeing breast or, a naked female anymore. That's not what this is. That's not our generation. This is not what we're talking about with porn today. It is infiltrated into our children. It is education for them. It is like watching a documentary. They think it is a real relationship. That they think that's what to expect in a relationship, or even I think it affects rape culture. I think it increases how we objectify people, how we look at people, how we value people. And sometimes there are dads that look at me in the face and be like, I just don't think it's a big deal. And I'm like, I'm not just talking about seeing naked bodies. I'm talking about the desensitization that is happening in your brain. Satan is one by one taking our minds off of him, off of the Lord, and putting it onto this fleshly objectification, unhealthy thing that is not of Jesus. Right. It is not of Jesus. And so I am so thankful that we have a dad who's willing to say it.
Well, I want to talk about a little bit about just the aspect of how we view, this. So there's so many questions. Okay, one, what percentage of these women are trafficked? What percentage of them are in a situation they've been placed in this sex trade and they have no way out? I mean, what percentage? A lot. We know it is, and we're sitting there contributing to that activity, okay? The second thing I kind of want to talk through, and I think this is a point of conversation that we avoid so much, and because let's be honest, a woman and a man are different. We're different sexually. We're different in how our bodies work. When we talk about the sex drive of a male, this is a hormonal issue. I mean, and you can see it. A guy that's got a whole lot of testosterone is probably going to be more promiscuous. He's going to chase a lot of different women. He's going to try to find more. He's more likely to cheat on his spouse. He's more likely to do all those things. A guy that has really low testosterone is not as likely. It's not as drawn to that. Well, that's a real physical. That's not just how you were raised. That is a physical issue. It is physical for me as a male to want to pursue a woman and to have sex. More so than it is for female. We know there's all kinds of variance along that spectrum, right? There's some women that have really high hormonal issues, and they're going to be more promiscuous than some others. And so, what I'm trying to do is separate the morality of this and put it more into a basic physical conversation. And the reason that's important is because if we start to look at it from that perspective, we're going to be less judgmental. Okay. And number one, women need to understand what they're dealing with men. And men need to understand what they're dealing with women. I'm not an expert at that. This is just observations Brian has made, okay? But I do know this is reality. I see it. And so when a male sees pornography and he can view that and he can take advantage of that, that removes some of those incentives that he has to be a good husband, to be a good boyfriend, to even look for a girlfriend. And so those physical realities, they're real. And if you are a Christian, especially, you've got to understand that in the spiritual world, that is being leveraged against us on a daily basis. But there's still got to be an answer to it. There's still got to be an answer. If you're a male, how do I deal with this physical reality that my body's telling me? A 16-year-old Walker Montgomery. How do I deal with that? So another question that I've posed is, our bodies are not instruments of change overnight. In other words, have grown to this place over a long period of time. You go back 100 years, men and women got married before they were 18 years old, typically. 15, 16, 17 years old. Our bodies are sexually mature starting 13, 14 years old. Well, now what we've done is we've put such a high priority on education. I'm not proposing we don't continue to do that, but these are still issues we got to figure out with our kids. We put a very high value on education and career. So what are we doing? We tell them that. We're saying, okay, I don't want you to get married until you're out of college, until you can support yourself financially. All of a sudden, you've taken a sexually mature male that 100 years ago, he'd have been married by the time shortly after being sexually mature. Now you're telling him you're sinning against God if you have sex before you're 25. How do we deal with that? I don't have an answer. I'm just telling you this is real. This is reality. And so we're putting these kids in situations, and now they've got access to pornography. They say, okay, I know how to do it. I'll take advantage of pornography, and that'll satisfy this physical need I have until I meet a spouse. And then you're creating a whole new problem. The new problem is now, well, we get to 25, 26, 27 years old, and I've gotten used to living alone. I've gotten used to doing everything I want to do, and I can make it all about me. And I don't really need a wife because I've got a better substitute from a sexual perspective than any woman could be. And that's real. That's truth. I don't have a complete answer to that. I'm just telling you we've got a lot of complex issues with our teens up till mid-20s that are very difficult to navigate. And pornography and Satan has plugged a hole in that and said, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to figure out a way to leverage the traps for the Walker Montgomerys of the world. And as parents, we've got to have those conversations and stop acting like this urge that our 16-year-old has is some dirty little secret, because it's not. We're all dealing with it.
The way you just lay that out, I think, is the conversation that most parents miss or are not willing to have with their kids. We want to say, don't have sex, wait till marriage, get an education, like you said, push those urges down, don't have nasty thoughts, and hey, go to church. And a lot of people, that is the extent of the conversation. Or here's how sex works. It's a one and done. Let's move on and talk about your future. Or let's talk about something else that's not difficult. Whereas the types of topics that you're bringing up and the way you're laying it out over time, this is why we say it's an ongoing conversation. It's addressing the reality of sitting with your kid or in the car or when you're walking. Hey, I know that this is what's going on with you, these urges, these feelings. And I was there once, and these are real. And here's the way that Satan is attacking, and getting deep into the nitty gritty of the reality of what our kids are facing. And parents are afraid to do it. And then, like you said, we're coming up against these situations like Walker, where not that you were afraid to do it, but that, all of us get into these situations where we're like, I didn't know I needed to have that conversation. I didn't know what Satan was doing. I didn't know how far these schemes had gone. And it's really scary because Satan is on the attack. And we see it now every day. We see these stories every day. And you're right. We don't have the answer necessarily, but it's happening and it's real.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we can do today is to educate and make these realities more transparent. Because I think about it, and what I just that situation I just laid out, I just look at it from my own perspective. And I know, okay, so I'm a 47-year-old man with a healthy sex drive. Okay, compared to a 16-year-old with a healthy sex drive, I mean, we're two different animals, right? Because I know what I was when I was 16 years old. Okay, but if you told Brian at 47, Brian, you got to go 10 years with no sex, I'm going to figure something out. And it's probably going to be pornography, because that is a, I can't, the best way I can describe it to someone else as a man, it's like telling me I can't eat. And I don't think most men want to acknowledge that. And there's a lot of, I'll go back to this. I'll say it again, that there's some men that don't see it that way. They don't have that same drive. And there's some men that have got a drive that's off the chart. But that is not just he's a bad guy, he's a good guy. Those are physical issues. And to wrap that back into this conversation, how do I help my 14-year-old navigate that? And the only way that I know today is to tell him, okay, look, my son's name is Bennett. Look, Bennett, I want you to honor God with your life. I want you to honor God. And when you honor God, he's going to bring opportunities to you that it's going to be worth it for you to avoid these filthy traps that Satan is setting for you, because that's what it is. And understand that these are realities that are out there in the world that are trying to garner your attention. And all those things are positioned to hurt you, not help you. And hope that he makes better decisions because he's got that information. I believe that Walker, had I had some of those really strong conversations with Walker relative, if I'd already gone through this in another way or another place in another life and could have this firsthand conversation with Walker, I believe he could have seen through what he was about to step into. And not only that, but I think that taking some of that shame off the table. Am I saying that it's okay to look at pornography? Absolutely not. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that when I give you those statistics that I just gave you, there's a huge chunk of our population that are engaging in that activity. So why would it be something that my son would think he needs to commit suicide over? Because he didn't know. He didn't understand that every man on the street corner is dealing with that same issue. He didn't know. I didn't tell him. And so that's what I would encourage parents to do, especially dads. This is for keeps, y'all. This is not, if dad's listening to me, this is not something that the enemy is going to give you back. When he takes it, he takes it. He don't give it back.
I think you're spot on, Brian, when you say educate. We don't have all the answers, but we can educate and raise awareness. And I think that is just key here. Educate our kids on the impact of pornography, on the impact of sextortion in these claims, educate our kids on, we even did a show recently with a psychologist where we talked about masturbation. And he talked a lot about the shame that some kids feel about that and how our bodies are designed to enjoy touch. That's how God designed us. Now, that doesn't mean we can watch pornography of somebody being sex trafficked and get off on that. Like, that's not okay. That's sinful. But the fact that touching your body may not be sinful if you can do that without a sinful thought. And that's a whole conversation too. Can you actually do that? I thought there's no way anybody could have that kind of experience without a thought. But he challenged us and he said, okay, but what about the 5-year-old at preschool that's humping the teddy bear? And it just feels good to her. Do you think that she's seen porn? And so that kind of challenged me on that a bit. Like all these things that I thought forever about, you couldn't never masturbate without a sinful thought. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the answers. But here's the thing. These conversations, just saying to our children, we know this, I don't know that. I don't have the answer to that, but we do know this. We do know what happened to Walker. We do know, pornography desensitizes you. We do know a lot of pornography is made under the influence of drugs and people being trafficked. These are the things we do know. And so we need to focus on what we do know and having these tough conversations with our kids. Having them. I also loved what you said, and I think this is a key conversation with our kids when we're talking about sex and pornography and, telling them to wait. Like you said, we are telling them to wait until 25, 26 now to have sex. And typically, I was 21 when I got married, and that just sounds like so young, right? But you bring up a good point when you talk about that. one of the things that I think is just so important is, and you touched on it, was, God created sex for equal pleasure, man and woman, in a safe marriage. That's what he created sex for. We see that in First Corinthians, right? We see it throughout scripture, but one of my favorite verses in First Corinthians. And one of the things that pornography does is it robs us of that, because then sex becomes about us. It doesn't become about pleasing our marital partner once we're married. And that's a whole conversation that I think we can have, as far as, this is what you're waiting for. You know what I mean? Like, this is what you're waiting for. Instead of just, you're awful if you do this. You're awful if you enjoy masturbating. You're awful if you are having these thoughts. Like, we have to move out of the shame and bring it into the light so we can actually talk about it.
Yeah, I think that,
I'm getting fired up over here. You're getting me fired up, Brian.
well, it seems obvious, right? But the most unobvious things in life are the things that, you think that, well, sex is just natural, and the activity is, but there's so many other aspects of it that are not, that are conversations that we avoid so heavily. And it's just, I guess it's natural to avoid those. And maybe we've come to a place in our culture, like I said, you go back 100, 200 years, which is no time from the standpoint of the way our bodies function and the physical realities of our bodies. It's no time. But you look at the things that what we're doing today, that idea of career and technology and all the things that are different from those times prior. Maybe our culture didn't have to deal with it as aggressively then as we do today. Maybe that's an evolution in our culture that we're experiencing, that things are changing, and we do need to have, maybe that's why we automatically and naturally don't want to talk about it, because it wasn't a topic that needed to be talked about maybe before. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that things have changed, and that, if we expect our kids to be healthy in this space, we've got to come up with some better answers than we have today. And if we don't ask the questions and pose the problems, because I think if you look at most of society and most of culture in America especially, we're sitting here thinking that, most secular people are going to view this conversation as, something that is not necessary. And the expectation of sex, of waiting until you're married, 25, 26 years old to have sex, is such a foreign idea. They would think we're the weirdest thing on the planet even having this conversation, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we're not speaking to those people. Because I'm challenging them. I want to challenge them just like I would somebody with a family. But you take that segment of population, and let's look at the outcomes of their lives. Let's just look at the outcomes of what those experiences and what those activities result in, whether it's disease, whether it's poor relationships, their expectations of their fellow man, how they see one another in those societies. There's nothing good about it. Nothing. And so let's do our best to call one another to a higher level rather than just have the expectations. Well, this is just the way it is. And you're weird if you think you shouldn't do that. And that's not what I think is the most healthy use of our time.
I think one of the things too, as I'm listening to you talk, and we're talking about educate your kids and all the things, I think some parents like me, we get overwhelmed that we don't have all the answers. And there's sometimes not a black and white answer. Sometimes there's not, right? As far as you have these urges, but this is what the Bible says, and this is what we know is healthy for you. And I just have found as a parent, like, it's okay to say that. But just the conversation in itself is education. Even if I don't have the answer, even if I don't know, it's getting your kid to think about it rather than just be desensitized by it. And I think that is just critical that we, because I do think a lot of parents are like, well, I don't know exactly what I'm going to say to my kids, so I'm just going to avoid it. And that's what we don't want to do, because I think as we've seen with Walker, Satan, like you said, Satan was setting the trap for Walker. And what we're trying to do is prevent that from future kids.
Well, I think that, that statistic I gave about pastors, 50% of pastors looking at pornography, that ought to tell us something. So they know better. right? They know it's not right. They know it's sinful, and they're in a profession, so to speak, that would obviously that would be means for direct termination if a church discovered their pastor was routinely looking at pornography. Well, half of them are. So let's ask the question: why would that be the case? And I go back to this physical reality that men face. And I think that the first thing we've got to ask is, as parents, as husbands and wives, let's set aside the rest of the population that may not be engaged in good, healthy marital relationships. But let's just take husbands and wives. Are they engaging in a sexual relationship from a healthy perspective? Are they taking care of one another? Is that pastor receiving and giving sex and receiving sex from his wife in a healthy way? Is it happening at all? And so why is that even important? Because I'm going to have a hard time educating my 15-year-old son about a healthy way to engage in sex when I don't know how. How would I know? What am I going to call if I'm a pastor, I'm going to call my assistant pastor and say, hey man, tell me how to do this. Right. No, that's not happening. None of that's happening. So what I want to encourage, my point in that is just to encourage adults to stop living in this world of you're either scum of the earth, or you're on the other side, you're doing everything right, because none of us have it figured out. None of us are in that position to throw rocks. We've all been, I've said this time and time again with Walker, I look at teenage boys, I look at the churches I go into, and I say, there's not anything Walker did that night that every single man in this building hasn't done. Walker got in a situation that he didn't realize that every other man that he was going to be judged by had done the same thing, just he got caught doing it. And that perspective you were talking about, the embarrassment of masturbation, that's where Walker found himself that night. And the threat of that being seen by everybody that he knew, he didn't understand that even if they would have had that video, he really could have easily just said, look, what are you talking about? I got caught. You didn't. I mean, that's the difference. And I think we put so much emphasis on hurting one another and embarrassing one another and pretending like we're something we're not, that it creates these pressures that are unnecessary, completely unnecessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And the word that keeps coming to my mind that we've brought up a few times today is shame. Like, shame has infiltrated our culture. Satan has used that so deeply in every area of our life, in every profession. Like you said, I mean, you're bringing up these statistics. Those are just the people that were honest. Usually in statistics, the numbers are much higher than what's reported because of shame. Even on paper, even on, doing an anonymous poll, people will lie just because they're so worried about being caught. So we know that those numbers are even worse than you're saying. And we're so afraid and shameful to talk about real things in our marriages with our kids that we're missing the point that it is literally killing us physically and spiritually. We're living these lives that are empty because we're just afraid to talk about the real stuff. And the weird thing is we're all dealing with it. If we just accepted that reality, we are all struggling with the same things, it would change everything. It would take the shame away. And so that starts with education and creating that safe place for our kids. Like being able to say to your kid, like, we're all struggling with this. Here's the reality. This is what it is. You can talk to me about it. Like taking out the weird feelings so that they know they can come to you. And that's hard, but it's our only tool. It really is our only tool to combat this.
I think I said this the last time we were on the podcast, the power of the sin is in the secret. And that
Yes.
that is so true, and I know of, it's odd, since I've been willing to talk about these types of issues. I shouldn't say it's odd. I think it's indicative of what we're talking about here, of honesty. Just people find a safe place. Everybody wants to talk about their problems. If you got a problem, you really do want to talk about it. You want to talk to somebody that can help you walk through it, that can respond to whether it's really a problem or not. There's all kind of innate characteristics in our makeup that make us want to be able to communicate what our problems are. And so from a pornography perspective, I mean, men that I wouldn't have thought that would confide in me, but have come to me with that they're dealing with a porn addiction. And a grown man you would think that can reason, that goes to work every day, they're scared to death that this secret's going to get out. They're scared they're going to lose their clients, scared they're going to lose their friends, they're scared their wife's going to leave them. All those things that are true fears. So imagine all those fears compounded from a man that can think clearly, that is a professional in his job, that is a good husband, that's maybe a coach, that's you name it. I mean, these guys are just normal men, but they're mature, right? Compare that to how a 16-year-old responds whenever he thinks that this is, and that's our own fault. I mean, that's our own fault that we let society push us into this corner of you're either in or you're out. And I mean, I challenge, especially when I go into schools, I challenge the kids there. I say, Walker responded the way he responded because of what he thought you would think, because of what he thought I would think, because of how he thought we would respond. And I don't think he was right. I think he was wrong. I think there would have been some people that would have made fun of Walker and ostracized him. But I also think there would have been some people that have come alongside Walker and said, look, man, it's okay. I still love you. And the more that we challenge our teens to forgive and to recognize that, just because you've got a good show going, don't mean that's the truth. And with social media now, it can, a person can make themselves look like anything they want to look like, but it's not true. It's not reality. And so that challenge of truth is something that we've got to continue to promote and try to remove some of the stigma of some of these activities and work through them and come up with good solutions. And some of them don't have easy solutions. I mean, this issue we're talking about with kids and their, sex drive and all those things, we don't have easy solutions to that. But I do think we're on the right track with communication and acknowledgement. As a 16-year-old boy, 15-year-old boy, the feelings you have and the desires you have and that physical need for sex that you're encountering, there's nothing wrong with that. That's how God made you. He made you that for a lot of reasons. The idea anymore that a competitive male is some kind of a monster is insane. It's insane. If we want to lose our culture, let's lose our competitive males. You'll see it go down the drain quicker than you can imagine. And that's just the reality. That's what's built this world we live in. And God built it that way on purpose. And so all the things and that's what it was. That's what we were built for. We were built to be able to create resources for our families and really, if you go back far enough, for our tribe, for the people that loved us, the people that we were around, and to procreate and to compete for a mate. Those things, all of a sudden, you look up and they've gone away. There are cultures around the world that haven't gone away. They're still competitive. And so I just want to challenge our men out there to be men. And don't let anybody tell you there's something wrong with being a man. It's not. I mean, God made us this way.
Strong, protective leaders. I mean, we need more men and leaders in our world today. It's something, and these young boys are often told that it's not okay to be that, and we gotta fix it. We have got to fix it. I do want to say one other thing, because you brought up just so many great points today. One of the things you said was, in the beginning, we talked about this is the church and this is the beautiful part of the church, but sometimes the church doesn't get it right. And I think this is one of the areas. You talked about pastors and their usage of pornography. One of the things that I think we've gotten terribly wrong in the church is that we haven't talked about sex is beautiful. It's always, even in a marriage, not really talked about, because, oh my gosh, does our pastor really have sex? I hope my pastor's having sex. I hope he's having good sex, right? Why are we not talking about the fruitful, amazing marriage? Adam and Eve running naked in the garden, and it was no problem whatsoever. Right? Why are we not talking about how beautiful and amazing that is in the church? And instead, it's even if you're married, oh, that's just something we don't talk about. What? Yeah. And I think that's kind of got us here, because then anything around sexual, even if it's within a marriage the way God intended, it almost feels shameful. And that's not biblical. That is not biblical. God created sex for equal pleasure, man, woman, in a marriage. And it is a beautiful, wonderful, amazing thing. And it's something we should be celebrating. But because we don't, and our our picture of marriage and sex is not good in the church, the fake aspect of pornography has filled our kids' minds, and that's what they think it is. It is a cheap substitute, and it is destroying our kids. It's just, in more ways than one, it is destroying our children and our culture.
Well, I think that everything that we talk about when you talk about the church, everything that we talk about, everything in life requires balance. I mean, the balance is the terminology that I want to use in terms of, what are we getting right and what are we getting wrong? Because you can describe this when we're talking about how, in the church and how sex can be, if we just say is a prohibition on sex is bad, don't do it. Well, guess what? Satan's going to figure out how to use that, and what he's going to do, he's going to plug into that physical need pornography. He's done that, right? Let's take another end of the spectrum. Let's say that we go into the church and the church says, let's all have sex. Well, if one's good, two's good. If one wife's good, let's have five. We can go all the way that end of the spectrum. Guess what? Satan can use that and run us off on a situation where he uses that physical need to drive selfishness, to drive lust, to do all those other things that are bad for us in another extreme. So that balance is where we've got to live to bring ourselves under the lordship of God. And we see your description of, where did this shame come from? Well, it came from sin. It came from the garden. Adam and Eve were perfectly content in one another's nakedness. And it wasn't just physical nakedness. It was emotional nakedness. It was connection nakedness. It was this connection between a man and a woman that didn't have secrets. They were completely transparent with one another pre-sin. Enter sin, what happens? They have to start covering that up. They have to start protecting against that because of judgment, because of all the other things that come into play whenever we enter into this sin relationship with Satan, really. And so he used that, and he's using it today, and he's not going to stop using it. He's going to continue to use it. And so where does the church fit into that? It's balance. It's conversations. It's the pastor should be having good sex. His wife should be engaged in good sex with her husband. He should be engaged in a relationship where he is looking to please his wife, and vice versa. And their kids should have no other expectation. They were produced through sex, and that desire to do it is good. It's not anything wrong with it, but it's got to be struck in balance. And I think that's where we always miss it. Whether we're talking about food, we're talking about sex, we're talking about work, you talk about all those things. All those things require balance for us to have a good, healthy relationship with Christ.
Well, we take stuff out, we take Christ out of it, and then the context goes crazy. And there's no clear vision then, because then anything goes, and all the different perspectives that you just painted for us. That's what happens. It's the slippery slope without Christ guiding us and doing it within the confines of what He says is correct and not correct. Brian, I feel like you say you don't have the answers, but I do feel like you gave so many good talking points today that could create some new conversations in homes. And that's what we were going for today, because, there is some evil person in Nigeria that attacked Walker in his bedroom that night, for sure. There's no way. And I hope that person will be brought to justice on earth and in heaven and everything. But there's also bigger things at play here. And I think you did a good job of showing how Satan is using pornography to kind of step by step take our kids away from what God has for them. And lots of great talking points. I know I came up with some more that I'm like, I got to go have this conversation. I got to do that. So thank you for that. Thank you for your transparency. Again, just being willing to talk to us. The dad voice is really important, and you say it so well, and so we appreciate you. We appreciate you.
Well, like I said, I don't know that it's my opinion, right or wrong, but you guys have again just been so supportive, and your listeners have been so supportive. We're so thankful. Thank you.
Please know we will be praying for you and Courtney and the kids, and staying connected and with you on your health journey, and also as a family. We're so thankful for you, and we look forward to having you on the show again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to get all this behind us, and we'll see what the Lord does with us. And we know that He's faithful, and He's going to continue to just open doors. That's what we're hoping for.
This podcast is ad-free. because of all the people who donate to our nonprofit.
Donation today at nexttalk.org.
This podcast is not intended to replace the advice of a trained healthcare or legal professional or to diagnose, treat, or otherwise render expert advice regarding any type of medical, psychological, or legal problem. Listeners are advised to consult a qualified expert for treatment.